So we are going to be making cookies today. On the board we have two different types of cookies. You've got chocolate chips and you've got Snickerdoodles. I'm going to be doing the demo for the Snickerdoodles, but the technique is basically the same, and I'm going to walk you through both of them. The technique that we are focusing on today is the creaming method, and this is where we blend together our sugar and our fats together. Now, whether that be all butter or all shortening for our fats, or if it's brown sugar, white sugar, or a combination of the two, it doesn't matter. Both of those are the things that we're going to put in together, and we're going to basically beat them pretty vigorously with our paddle attachment. The recipes that are on the board are for 2 dozen, so you guys are going to split those in half, and so each team is going to make a dozen, and I will also make a dozen here. Okay. Now, before, when we were doing some baking, particularly the buttermilk biscuits, we did our butter needed to be cold and hard. But because we are creaming them and we're whipping it all together with the sugar, we actually want all of our fats to be relatively soft. Okay. So in this case, I can either leave it sitting on the counter for a length of time and let it get nice and soft, or I have a little microwave trick. You guys can use that because all of your butter is in the refrigerator. But the microwave trick is to turn the microwave on defrost, and then we do it for right around 12 seconds. If you do it too long, the butter will actually melt and separate. When the butter melts and separates, then you can't get it back together, and you're not going to get the results you want. On this one, it actually happens to have a time defrost, and then I can just put 12 seconds and start it. Some of the microwaves don't have that, and what you have to do is adjust the power setting. So if you do like cook power and press 3, that one will turn it to, it'll say 30 and then defrost. Okay, and then you do it for 12 seconds. See, it doesn't take that long. And this is already starting to melt. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. Okay, and don't do it too long. So you might try it for 10 seconds. Okay, we're going to put this in here, and we just want it to be nice and soft. And then I'm also going to use my shortening, which is Crisco, same thing. Okay, and I do use a butter flavored because I like the flavor. Still have some of the foil wrapper on it. Guys, I do like the flavor of the butter. So both of those are a 1/4 cup. Both of those have a very, very different finish to them when you're cooking with them in the cookies. If you try to use all butter or all Crisco, you get much different cookies. So we are going to use half and half for our Snickerdoodles here. All right. So now for our sugar, we're going to have 3/4 of a cup. And I could use a 1/2 cup and then 1/4 cup, or I could just take my 1/4 cup, measure it 3 times. Don't forget to make sure that this is nice and level. We want a good accurate measurements here. Trust me, if you're not accurate with your measurements on your cookies here, you will get very different results than what you're going to see I get. There's something that we have when we're baking cookies that we call spread. And spread has to do with the ratio, basically, of fat and sugar together, and how the cookie actually spreads out on the pan when it cooks. Okay, and if you get those ratios off, then they'll either be big, thick, and cakey, or they'll be like super thin, like plates, and it'll run all together. So you need to be really careful with your measurements here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, make sure it's locked down. I'll turn this on here. And I'm going to just kind of start that butter and shortening with the sugar. Then I'm going to go ahead and turn it up. Okay? And I really want these two to beat together to the point where the butter is starting to stick to the side, or the fat's starting to stick to the side. Okay? So that this paddle attachment is really working it and mixing the two together. So I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to scrape the sides down, wait till it stops. Now, particularly with the cookies, as we make these, there's going to be several times you stop and scrape them down. I think we talked about this before, scraping down the sides. Just use your little spatula for that. All right? And we're going to give it another spin here. All right, now can you see how the butter and the sugar has gotten much kind of lighter in color as it's kind of mixed together and really whipped, and we've gotten some air in there? That's really the color that we're going for. We're going to slow it down now. And now it's time to add our liquid ingredients. Okay? If I were adding a flavoring, I would be doing that now. When you do cookies here, It is proper technique to mix in one egg at a time, because as I mix the egg in with this, it can actually start to separate, and you can see where there's chunks of eggs and then the butter and the sugar are not all together, and we want that all to be one. So if I was making the full double recipe, which actually fits really nicely in these KitchenAids, if I was making the double recipe, I'd have 2 eggs in here, and I'd only add them one at a time, and I would wait until the first egg incorporated before I added the second one. Now you guys saw me crack it into here. That's so if I get any shells or anything, if there's something wrong with the egg, I can get rid of it without it being in my recipe here. So I am going to go ahead and turn this on and go ahead and put it in here somewhat slowly. Now with one egg, it kind of tends to just grab it and pull it on out. Okay. I could have broken that egg up and poured it in slowly. You see how, if you guys can see down in there, you see how it's kind of soupy down in there, and you can still see the thick, sugary part on the outside, okay? It's a good indication that we need to go ahead and scrape it down. Okay, so we'll go ahead and scrape it down a little bit, and then we're going to turn it back on and let this paddle whip this back in. Now when you mix a double recipe, it's going to look slightly different than this, because when you put one egg in, you're going to have still a lot more butter and sugar. But what you're really going for is to get that fully incorporated. All right. So now if you guys can see down in here, you have a much different mixture. It's all one. You don't really see that egg separated, right? Okay. So now we have our, and if you're making one that has a flavoring, you would just do it at the same time as you just did those eggs. Do your flavorings. But now is where I'd add my dry ingredients. So for the Snickerdoodles, it doesn't really have any add-ins. It just has the flour and the baking soda and the cream of tartar and the salt. It has all of those. We'll put all of those in. But this is the point that if I were making the chocolate chip cookies, I would add with the flour and with these dry ingredients in my chocolate chip cookies. Okay, remember we've talked about glutens and flour before. Particularly now, we just want the flour to be a very loose structure for our cookies. We don't want to develop the glutens at all. Okay, we made the pizza dough and really developed the glutens because we're making a bread. We made the buttermilk biscuits and we developed the glutens a little bit with our kneading process, but now we really don't want to develop those at all. We're just going to stir it until it all comes together. Okay, if I put my flour in first and stir it all in and then add in my add-ins, okay, and when I say add-ins, like if I was making oatmeal cookies, that would be your oatmeal. If I was making pecan sandies, your pecans, whatever else you're going to put in there. If I waited until it was all incorporated and then put more in there, you can start to develop the glutens on the flour a little much, and then you get kind of that cakey texture, okay? And that's not what we're going for here. All right, so for the Snickerdoodles, I'm going to use a cup and 3/8 for this half of a recipe. So the cup is kind of easy to figure out, right? Okay, we're going to get our cup in here. Now on the 3/8, I'm going to use kind of a combination of measurements here. All right, I'm going to take my quarter cup, and the quarter cup is going to be how much?
2/8.
2/8, right? Okay. Now to get the other one, we have a few of these number 16s in cooking, right? You've got 16 ounces in a pound. You have 16 tablespoons in a cup, which means 2 tablespoons equals 1/8 of a cup. You also have 16 cups in a gallon. So those are like the 3/16s in culinary arts that are pretty useful to you. All right, so that's my 1 3/8 cups of flour. And then we're going to add our other dry ingredients. Now, the last time that we used baking powder, I talked a little bit about it, but our baking powder is actually 3 things. It's baking soda, tartaric acid or cream of tartar, and a non-caking agent like cornstarch, and they're mixed together in a real specific way. But for this recipe, we want a little bit higher, particularly for the Snickerdoodles, we want a little bit higher that tartness from the cream of tartar. Okay, so for our cream of tartar, we're asking for a teaspoon. Okay, now I am going to use my smallest one here just so I can get down in this container. So I'm going to use my 1/4 teaspoon, and that means I got to use it 4 times. Okay. A little bit goes a long way on that stuff. And then on the baking soda, we're going to use half of a teaspoon for that. And then our last is our salt. Now our salt on the original recipe calls for 1/4 of a teaspoon. So we're going to take this 1/4 teaspoon and we're doing half of that, so 1/8. We're just going to fill it up partially here, about halfway, load it in there, and we'll be all done with that. And that is basically all we need to make our snickerdoodles. Now, again, now I'm just going to turn this thing on to stir because I don't want to develop those glutens. Okay? And as it starts to form the dough on the bottom, the cookie dough on the bottom, I am going to stop it and scrape it down. So we get you can hear the motor actually start to firm up and bind up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. Scrape down here this extra flour. Extra, it's not really extra flour, it needs to be in there. It's part of our recipe here. And again, because we're being careful not to over mix these, this scraping down right here is pretty important to make sure you get all of it in there so your ratios stay right. Okay, and I'm going to watch down in there. When I'm watching down in there, I'm making sure that I don't have any of the powdery flour left, and that is going to be it. Okay, we don't. You see how when we get to this step, we don't really mix it very hard. Okay, I'm going to unlock it, take this off, and now we're basically to our final step of shaping them and finishing them off. And get them in the oven here. Alright. So we are going to be using a cookie tray for this. Okay, our cookie sheet. Now on these cookie sheets, these are not the half sheet trays that we used the last time that have a much thicker bottom. These are much thinner. Those really help. I feel like it really helps to transfer the heat and give a nice crisp bottom to the cookies. It actually helps them to release really easily too because of how quickly this metal will cool off. Okay, so I really like to use the sheet trays, you guys, or the cookie sheets. Y'all should use this. They do also make them where they're double walled, which means they've got a layer of air in between them. But we're just going to use a single sheet like this. Now we are also going to use our portion scoops. You guys haven't used the portion scoops yet. On the portion scoops, all of them have a little number right there. Okay, the number tells you what size it is, and that size is based on a quart. Okay, so 1 quart or 32 ounces. So this one says it's a number 30 scoop. That means that there are 30 of these scoops in 1 quart. Okay, so that means it's a little bit over an ounce in volume. Alright, but this number 30 scoop happens to work very well with this recipe. I'll just scrape them off here to give me my 12 cookies. Okay, you want to make sure you get that thing good and full so your cookies are nice and even size. And I've heard lots of people say it looks like ice cream. It's okay, it does, doesn't it? It would really be bad when we put it in the oven if it was. So now the last step for snickerdoodles, okay? We have these all portioned out. I'm going to go ahead and roll these a little bit into a ball, and then I've got cinnamon and sugar. Okay, this is just cinnamon and white sugar mixed together. Same stuff you put on your toast. Okay. Or on churros.
I like churros.
Me too. Alright, and then we're just going to toss these so that it coats them. I'm not really like pressing this on here. I'm just rolling it around so that it coats it. Whatever sticks to it is what sticks to it, and whatever doesn't, doesn't. Now each of these sheet trays or these cookie trays fits a dozen cookies really well. You guys are going to want to take bake these on just one sheet tray, and then in the middle of the oven. Gives a good, nice, even cook. Some of these are a little loose, so you see me pressing them together. Just when I start to roll them, if they started to fall apart. Alright, Again, toss these in our sugar here. Now, one last final step. Now, there's two ways to treat these cookies at the end, okay? One of the things I want to make sure I evenly space them out and I don't get them too close to the edge so they don't fall off the edge, especially if you get the ratio off a little bit. There's two ways to treat these cookies. I can leave these just like this and let them spread naturally. Usually that's going to give you a much thicker cookie. When you have a ratio like we have with this fat and this amount of sugar. But what I like to do to finish these is I take a cup, I take one of these tumblers, and I just tap it in the cinnamon sugar a little bit, and I'm going to press it down just enough so that the cookie spreads to be about the size of the bottom of it. Okay? And I get a real even look this way. The reason I'm tapping it in the cinnamon sugar is because if I do this, sometimes it tends to get some of the fat from the cookie dough on the bottom of the cup, and then they'll start sticking to it, and then I don't get a real good result. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press down half of them, and the other half I'm just going to leave, and you'll see the difference in the results when we put them in. Okay? So now I'm going to put them in my oven. My oven is preheated to 400 degrees. When you guys are doing the chocolate chip cookies or the Snickerdoodle cookies, there's two different temperatures there. So if your group is doing the chocolate chip cookies, you need to make sure that you have the right temperature on your oven. I'm going to put them in here. All right, and our recipe does say 8 to 10 minutes. It's been going right at 9 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to do it for 8 minutes. Check it, make sure they're okay, and if so, I'll go another minute.
One tablespoon of vanilla, would that be?
Half. All right.
Are we done?
Yep. Alright guys, these are the ones that I pressed down here clearly, and these are the ones that I just left in the ball to just to naturally spread as they would. Now, this cracking that you see taking place, that is very typical. That is what we are looking for from a Snickerdoodle cookie. That's a mark of a good Snickerdoodle cookie. You can see on the ones that are left this way, you get much larger cracks. On the ones that are pressed down, they're a whole lot smaller on them. Now, these cookies right now, I'm going to go ahead and touch them. These cookies right now are very soft. See how soft they are? Okay? And they don't have a lot of firmness to them. But part of what that is they just came out of the oven, and they're also not releasing from the pan right now. They're still kind of stuck. Okay? So, part of what it is the fat is still very, very hot, and that keeps it kind of fluid, kind of molten almost, right? As it cools off, it starts to solidify, and then these cookies are going to firm up quite a bit. Okay? So even as soft as these are, they will end up being nice and crisp. They'll still have a softness to them. But even in the time that we're talking here, this pan is cooling off. Again, why I like to use the cookie sheets. The pan is cooling off, the cookies are cooling off, and they are going to already start to firm up quite a bit. And then it is kind of important. All right, look at this already. This is ready to come off. It is still pretty warm. Okay, look at the bottom of these. Okay, so nice and brown. No, I'm going to cut them all in half. Okay, so we are going to let these cool just a little bit, but once they get to where you can release them from the pan, I'm going to use the spatula and I'm going to go ahead and transfer them to a oven rack. Okay, the oven rack lets the air circulate all the way around them. Okay, the longer they sit, we do need to let them sit on the tray for a little bit, but the longer they sit on the tray, the bottoms will start to get soggy because of the retaining heat between the two. Okay, they need the air circulation to help them to crisp up and not get soggy on the bottom or have any condensation from moisture because of the heat. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and start transferring these over and let them cool a little bit more, and then we can sample them. All right.